Hello, and welcome back to the book of Daniel, chapter 8. So let's immediately get going. So, reading from verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar. Now remember, Belshazzar lasted about 10 years. So this was the beginning of the reign of Belshazzar. Alright? When Belshazzar was regent because his father Nabonidus had gone off on campaign or pilgrimage or whatever. So remember I stated that the back half of the book of Daniel doesn't necessarily flow in order. Alright? At least not in chronological order. So in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, I think the last video, the last chapter, chapter 7, was in the first year of Belshazzar. Right? So a couple of years later, in the third year of Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, in the palace or the citadel, which is in the prophet of Elam. So that's in modern day Iraq. It's not Iraq. That's in modern day Iran. All right? Elam was like southern Iran. All right? So he was in the palace in Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. All right? So the Persian capital, they had a lot of canals. You needed water to supply big major cities, so they dug a bunch of canals. So he was in southern Iran, right, at the palace in Susa, right, close to the Ulai Canal. Let's continue. And I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. Okay, I used an AI graphical tool to create the picture of the ram. So just imagine that one of the horns is bigger than the other. All right, so one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. Why wasn't it charging eastward? Because it came from the east. No beast could stand before him, and there was no power who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became great. Now, this ram is the same as the bear from chapter 7. In chapter 7, it was a bear, but it was on its side, and one side was higher than the other. This is the same thing. There's a ram, and one of the ram's horns is higher. The newer horn, the horn that came up after, became greater. Now, Persia, the Persian Empire, was started by Cyrus, and Cyrus was a Medo-Persian. All right, his mother was one thing, his father was a next, and he ended up overthrowing his father. So he was the head of the Medes and the Persians. So it was initially, all right, like a dual kingdom with dual power. The Medes had the same amount of power as the Persians, but that changed. And eventually, like if you go to history books, they'll talk about the Persian Empire. All right, the Medes just got essentially sidelined over time, or of less power over time. In fact, if you remember, earlier in the book of Daniel, when Cyrus captured Babylon, he placed as ruler of Babylon a guy named Darius the Mede. So it was supposed to be a kingdom that was, equally ruled by the Medes and the Persians, but over time that changed, and the Persians basically took forefront. And we're going to see that further down in the book of Daniel. All right, so this ram is the great Persian Empire, and to be perfectly honest, no one could stand against the Persian Empire. The Persians, for the time that they ruled, they did what they want. In fact, a lot of times Persia is going to war with a particular place, they will just come up to that particular city and the war done, because they would come with so many people, the enemy would state, let's sue for peace. It makes no sense fighting these people. So this great ram that did what he wanted and that kept growing stronger and stronger is the Persian Empire. Let's continue. And from verse 5, as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. This goat was moving so fast, it was not touching the ground. It was just running at a tremendous pace. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. Now again, I used either Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini to create this picture, and it refused to comply with a single horn. So just imagine that this goat has a single horn instead of two horns. So he had one great horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. He ran at him angrily. So in chapter 7, we saw a leopard with wings to symbolize how quick the leopard is. Well, this one, it's the same thing. It symbolizes the same thing. This one is a goat, a he-goat, that is moving so quickly it appears as if he's not even touching the ground. And this speaks of the Greece, well, technically the Macedonians, under Alexander. Alexander conquered so quickly. In fact, Alexander, when he took over from his father, Philip of Macedon, he started his wars at the age of 19. And by 30, he had conquered the entire known world. And he cried because there was nothing else to conquer. And he died shortly thereafter. He moved so fast. In fact, in most of his battles, in all of his battles, at least against the Persians, Alexander was outnumbered. But Alexander used speed to his advantage. All right? So he moved fast. Remember, in these days, these guys don't have trains, planes, or automobiles. They had foot power. And he marched from Greece straight across the Eurasian plain. And he conquered everything there was in about 10 years. He moved really quickly, and even in his battles, he used speed and violence of action to win his battles. Okay? So we see the ram, that is Persia, and we see the he-goat with the single horn. So imagine this goat has one horn. All right? And we see these two powers coming together. Let's continue. And from verse 7, and I saw him being the he-goat, come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him. And in the future books, we will discuss why the Greek under Alexander was so angry with the Persians. He was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. So there were a series of battles between the Greeks, led by Alexander, and the Persians, led by Darius. Excuse me. Right. So now let me put this into perspective. All right. So the Greeks under Alexander are facing the Persians under Darius III. At the time, numerous historical writers claimed that Darius's army was at no point less than 400,000 men. All right, because there were a number of battles between the Persians and between the Greeks. Alexander left Greece, he left Macedon with an army of 40,000. So Darius's army was 10 times bigger, and in every single battle, Alexander used speed and decisive action, actions to his benefit. What he would do is both armies had different tactical styles. For the Persians, Darius at the center commanded all his various detachments of his army, and they will not move without a command from Darius, probably usually through raising flags, lowering flags, raising banners, pointing, etc. Alexander, on the other hand, he had an overall battle plan, and he was in charge of it, yes, but his generals had great autonomy in the movements of their particular divisions or detachments. All right, so he put a great deal more trust in his generals, and therefore he was a bit more fluid on the battlefield. So in that way, an army of, and then this is how God had it designed. So an army of 40,000 consistently defeated the Persians. And the final battle was at Gaugamela, also called the Battle of Arbela. The Persians looked like if they were winning, and in the battle a hole opened, and there was a straight path to Darius. And what did Alexander do? He took his companion cavalry and he charged through that gap. Darius saw him coming and fled. And from the time, it's like chess. Once the king is taken or the king breaks, the army falls to pieces. And that's what kept happening. And after the Battle of Arbela, when Darius fled and the army was finally broken, Darius basically hid and kept moving around until one of his own people killed him and brought his head to Alexander, who then killed the person who killed him. But with a smaller army, 10 times smaller. Darius's army was at least 400,000. Alexander's army was at most 40,000. Alexander and the Greeks were able to destroy and defeat the mighty Persians and took control of Persia. All right, so let's continue. Let's not continue as yet. So after fighting the Persians, Alexander he even got into India. And then at 31 years old, at the height of his power, he just up and died. And who took over his kingdom? His 4 generals. There was a 5th general, but Alexander, I believe, killed him. Right? So his 4 generals took over all the corners of his empire at that time. At that time, he was in control of most of the known world. So you'll see that 4 conspicuous horns came up towards the 4 winds, or the 4 cardinal points. So you had the north taken over by Seleucus, who took Syria. Now, by the way, when I talk about when the Bible talks about north, south, east, and west, the center point is Jerusalem. The center point is Israel. At some point, I've been toying with doing a video on why Christians should support Israel. right? But the center point is Israel. So when it talks about the north, they're talking about Seleucus, who took Syria and the areas around that. He took Syria all the way to the east, right? No, sorry, not Seleucus took the east from just slightly north of Israel, which is Syria, all the way to the east. Lysimachus, he took Turkey, which is far north of Israel. Cassander took Greece, which is to the west, all right? And to the south, Ptolemy, he took Egypt and part of Africa, all right? Part of what's known as Ethiopia, all right? So you had Cassander to the west, Lysimachus to the far north, Seleucus to the near north or the close north, and all the way east, right? In terms of land space, I think Seleucus had the biggest land space, and Ptolemy to the south in Egypt. Now, in terms of all of these, the two strongest were Ptolemy and Seleucus, and we are going to see that in the surrounding years. So the great battle of Arbela, when the Persian empire was destroyed by the Greeks and replaced by the Greeks, that took place around 331 BC. All right, but let's continue now. Out of one of them, one of those four horns, came up a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. What does that mean? There came up somebody, right? He became very powerful in the east, and he was also very powerful in the south. And he greatly interfered with the glorious land. What's the glorious land? Israel. It grew great even to the host of heaven. And we're going to watch and see something weird here. Some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host, or the ruler of the host, or the leader of the armies. And the regular burnt offering was taken from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. So that states who the prince of the host is. The prince of the host is the leader of Israel. Because why? Okay, pause 1 second. Okay, excuse me. Right. And the regular burnt offering was taken from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown or torn down. Now, on face value, this is speaking about this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. But this is not speaking only about this guy. Now we know, and I think I've spoken about Antiochus Epiphanes in the past, and I got a lot of him to speak about in the future. All right, so I'm not going to stray or stay too much on Antiochus Epiphanes, because a lot of future books of Daniel mentions Antiochus Epiphanes. But there were things Antiochus Epiphanes did. He took away the daily sacrifice, yes. He kind of took away and damaged the temple, or the temple that was rebuilt by Ezra, or started being rebuilt by Ezra. All right, he damaged the temple and took away the temple. He sacrificed a pig in the temple, etc. But this passage is not only speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes is a man. And if you look at verse 10, it grew great, it being the horn, this horn that came up. It grew great even to the host of heaven, even to the armies of heaven. And some of the hosts, the armies, the word for host is Sabah, And most of the time, that speaks to non-humans. That speaks about non-humans. And some of the hosts and some of the stars, it threw down to the ground and trampled on them or displaced them. Antiochus Epiphanes was a man. What we're seeing here is a dual prophecy. And the Bible is full of dual prophecies. So it starts speaking about someone, and then it speaks about someone else in between. And let's look at a couple examples of dual prophecies. So the first example is Isaiah chapter 14. All right? And it reads, "When the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil, and the hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon." So it is speaking about the ruler of Babylon. Okay? So let's look at what this is saying about, excuse me, I kept hitting the mic there. Let's look at what this is saying about Nebuchadnezzar, the main ruler of Babylon during that time. Listen to this lament or this condemnation against the king of Babylon, this in this prophecy in Isaiah 14. Now remember, we're speaking about the king of Babylon. All right, so we were in verse 3, we're jumping down to verse 12. "How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn?" Now, if you are reading from another translation, it may say, "O Lucifer, son of the morning." Right? If you're reading from the King James, in the Hebrew, it will essentially say, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Hillel ben Shachar?" Right? "O day star, son of the dawn." The day star is the brightest star in the sky. It's so bright it's seen during the morning. So this is speaking about a heavenly being. When did any king of Babylon, Phallus, Nebuchadnezzar, or any one of them, become a star in the sky, become a divine being? "How are you cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low?" Okay, Nebuchadnezzar did lay some nations low. "You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heaven, above the stars of God, or above the other gods, the angels." When did Nebuchadnezzar do that? "I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mountain of assembly in the far reaches of the north, or on the sides of Saphon." When did Nebuchadnezzar say that? When did Nebuchadnezzar state or think that he was going to be higher than the gods? Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan, right? At least for most of his life. Some believe he ended up believing in Yahweh. The stars of heaven are the beings God made that we like to call angels. He worshipped some of them because that's what these false gods are. So he worshipped some of them. When did he state in his heart he's going to erect a throne and place himself above them? He never did. But there's a being who did. "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High," or El Elyon. Who is the Most High? The Most High is Yahweh. So obviously, this passage started speaking about the king of Babylon, and then switched and started speaking about the first great divine rebel, who we like to call Satan, or from this passage, Lucifer. Because that's what Lucifer means, the day star, right? In the Latin. Lucifer. So we're seeing a dual prophecy here. It started speaking about a man, and then moved on and was speaking about someone else. Let's look at another example. And we're looking at Ezekiel from chapter 11, verse 1. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, thus says the Lord. And we're jumping down. Sorry. Excuse me. All right. Thus says the Lord God, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering: sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle. And crafted in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. Now, when did the king of Tyre walk in Eden, the garden of God? When was he made of precious stones? And when the Bible is speaking about you have precious stones in you, you're talking about, they're describing not that you have gold hair and you have a diamond kneecap. It means that every color of light was exuding from you. You are essentially a being of light. This is speaking of a divine being. You are an anointed guardian cherub, which means you are senior cherub. You are senior throne guardian. Throne guardian. Or in New Testament parlance, you are an archangel. When was the king of Tyre that? I placed you in. You were on the holy mountain of God. The king of Tyre was never on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire, or the angels, the gods, you walked. When did the king of Tyre do that? So he never did. So this is another dual prophecy. It starts speaking about a man, and then it goes on to speak about someone more than a man. And that's what we see in this passage that starts speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Let's get back to it. So it starts speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but then it continues speaking about somebody else. And the somebody else it continues to speak about is the Antichrist, who we like to call the Antichrist. So we see that the Antichrist, now by the way, Antichrist or Antichristos is Greek. Our concept of what it means is wrong. We believe that it means the person who is in opposition to Christ. And while the Antichrist is and will be in opposition to Christ, that's not what the word means. It means the replacement Christ. Now, rebellious angels or rebellious gods, whatever you wish to call them, they are not stupid. They know they can't fight Yahweh. They know they won't win. But what they do know is Yahweh lives by law. So if they can get us to do certain things, it's going to prolong them being in rulership and them actually living. Okay? So the Antichrist that's coming, he appears as a man, but he is the replacement Christ. And the same way Christ was completely God and completely man, the Antichrist will be completely man and completely something else. Because he throws down some of the hosts of heaven. We're going to see in a future book of Daniel what that looks like. All right, in a future chapter of Daniel, what that looks like. We're going to see some divine, or the talk about divine battles in a future chapter of Daniel, but I'm not going to get into it now. But this person wages war on earth, and he wages war in the heavens. And this is not Antiochus Epiphanes. So this passage we're seeing here, it references some of the things Antiochus Epiphanes does. And in the future, it's going to get into details about some of what Antiochus Epiphanes does. But this also points to our time and what the future Antichrist will do. All right, which we'll see shortly. So it threw down some of the stars. In verse 7, we saw that this future ruler that we like to call the Antichrist will actually prevail and destroy many Christian people, many members of the church. I'm assuming that's the church 2.0 that will come after the rapture, when he's allowed to prevail against them. All right, but let's continue. Let's go forward. And a host will be given over it together with the regular burnt offering because of the transgressions. In other words, an army will be lost, and the regular burnt offering will be lost because of rebellion. At the time of Antiochus, the nation of Israel, they had come back from Babylonian captivity, but they were in rebellion. All right? They were doing consistently the wrong things. Okay? They had changed, they had allowed the Seleucids to change their calendars. Israel is, according to the Bible, a picture. It's like a living prophecy. All right? All their rituals, etc., are supposed to point towards something. And down to the calendar, because things happen at specific times, or as the Bible says, appointed times. So they allowed the Seleucids to change the calendar. They allowed the Seleucid to change things. Israel had to follow a structure. The priests had to be from one clan or one tribe. The king had to be from another tribe. They changed that, they mixed it. They essentially rebelled. They came back into the land after exile, but they still rebelled. So an army was lost. And that's exactly what they did. They decided to go up against Antiochus, and he wiped out a bunch of them. In fact, anyway, I'll leave that to later on in this video. Right? So a host will be given over, lost to it. What is it? The horn, together with the burnt offering. So a host or an army and the burnt offering will be lost to the horn. Why? Because they were rebellious. And it will throw truth to the ground. It could be living in modern times. We constantly live in a post-truth world where you don't know what's the truth. That's what's happening. It will throw truth or the truth to the ground and will act, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking. Right? I heard a Kadosh speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, or the abomination that makes desolate, or the abomination of desolation, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot?" Let me pause there for a second. I just stated that the passage started speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes and will continue, but it's actually a dual prophecy and it's for the future. Right. Well, we just see here it mentions, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering and the abomination that makes desolate?" Now, the abomination that makes desolate, or the abomination of dissolution, happened when Antiochus erected a statue of Jupiter in the Holy of Holies and sacrificed a pig on the altar, which essentially made the temple unclean and no longer fit for Yahweh or for sacred space. That happened over about 200 years before the time of Christ. But Christ stated, before he left, Christ stated, when they were asking about the time of the end, he states, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken about by Daniel, run. Now, Christ was not mad. He knew that was past. So what Christ is saying is that is going to happen again. This is a dual prophecy we're reading, and most of this prophecy, because in the future, in a future chapter in Daniel, we see Daniel go over this again. So this particular prophecy here is speaking a lot towards the future. So for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the king giving over of the sanctuary and the host to be trampled under feet? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. If you are reading from the King James, it will say for 2,300 days. That's a mistranslation. The word days is in Daniel quite a bit. It's in Daniel, in the first half of Daniel. It's in Daniel in Aramaic, where it's Yom. And in the rest of Daniel, it's in Hebrew, where it's Yom. The word used here is neither of the two. The word used here is evenings and mornings, Erev and Boka. So it says for 2,300 Erev Boka, evening mornings. This is the only place in the Bible that I have found or I know about that it says this or it uses this for 2,300 evening mornings. Now, what can this mean? Now, if you think evening mornings, and by the way, this was the genesis of the Jehovah Witnesses. They read this and calculated from the date 2,300 years using the whole year for day theory, and they calculated 2,300 years from the desolation that makes the abomination and makes desolate done by Antiochus, and they came up to 1914. So they stated Jesus is coming in 1914, and they all went to a field or something to wait for Jesus. Didn't happen. So they said, oh, we made a mistake in converting the years. We were a year too early. So they came back in 1915. It didn't happen. So thereafter it says, okay, what happened is Jesus came already and he rules on our hearts, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So this was the genesis of the Jehovah Witnesses. Right? They misunderstanding or someone misunderstanding a passage. Now, what does 2,300 evening mornings mean? Well, it can mean a couple different things. 2,300, if it's days, that's just over 6.5 years. But if evening mornings mean 2,300 evening mornings, which means if you take 2,300 that means if you put them together, that means 1,150 days, which is about a year and 3.25 years. What does that mean exactly? I am not sure. What I do know is the Great Tribulation is around that period, 3.5 years. But the whole last 7 years of Daniel's 70-week prophecy, that's a little over 2,300 days. So does the 2,300 evening mornings mean evening and mornings? If you add 2,300 evenings and mornings with half being evening, half being mornings, I'll work out 1,150 days. We will find out. To be perfectly honest, it will be pure conjecture. It could be 3.5 years, and in fact, that's exactly how long the temple was defiled. Historically, it was defiled for about 3.25 to 3.5 years. And then the Maccabees took it back and cleansed it. So from the abomination that makes desolate, the cleansing of the temple, was just about 3.5 years. And in the future, it states that the Great Tribulation will be just about 3.5 years until Jesus comes and cleanses the world. Okay? So, let's move forward. When I, Daniel, reading from verse 15, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. Now, in the Bible, in a previous video, I've gone through Hebrew times, right? So times being months, days, years, and then instead of decades, they have 7-year periods, Shemitah. After that, they have Jubilees, which is 7 Shemitah plus 1. So that's 50 years. After, above Shemitahs, they have Unas, which is 10 Shemitahs. 10 Jubilees, right? A Jubilee is 50 years, so 10 Jubilees would be 500 years. That's an Una. And above an Una, they have what's called an age, which is roughly 2,000 years. So when you see time of the end, it sometimes speaks about the end of an age. In fact, it usually speaks about the end of an age. The issue is which age. So for example, there are people who attack the New Testament, stating that when in the New Testament we see before the time of the end, this will happen, that will happen. And scoffers will pick up and say, you see, oh, this didn't happen, oh, that didn't happen. No, the scoffers, you're dumb. You don't understand, and you argue things you don't understand. What they're speaking about is the end of the age. And the end of the age in the time of the New Testament was 70 or 75 AD. And everything that was supposed to happen, for example, before the end. You see, we see the end, and we've been taught that every time we see the end or the end time, it means the end of the world when Christ is coming back. No, sometimes it means the end of the age. So all through the New Testament, there are places we see before the, like for example, before the end of the age, the temple will be destroyed. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD, 5 years before the end of the age. So in this passage, it states that the vision is for the time of the end, but which end? Usually it doesn't talk about an end of a Shemitah, or it's not talking about an end of a Jubilee or of an Una. It's usually the end of an age. Now, the time with Daniel, the age ended in 70 AD. Alright, so we're far away from the end of the age. So what can they be talking about? They could be talking about the end of the age of man, or our time. Our time. Our end times. The end times of the age of before Jesus comes back to reign. And I've stated before that according to the Bible, the end time starts when the fig tree is replanted in the land. What's a fig tree? The fig tree symbolizes an apostate Israel, or an Israel that does not believe in its God. And that is currently Israel. Israel is there. About half of Israel is atheist. And most of the other half believes in Yahweh to some extent, but they don't believe in Messiah. It's only about 10% of Israel or Jews worldwide that believe in Messiah. They're called Messianic Jews. So generally, the government of Israel, the ruling body of Israel, doesn't believe in Messiah, so it's a fig tree. When Israel starts to believe and being led by Messiah, or the ruling elite believes in Messiah, it then will be called an olive tree. And after 133 AD, when Israel ceased to be a nation because the Romans deported them, in 1948, Israel became a nation again, but a nation that didn't believe in the Messiah. So it became a fig tree. The fig tree was planted, and that started off the time of the end. And according to the Essene calendar found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the end time is around 2075, 2076 BC, AD, or roughly 51 years from now. Why is there a difference? Because if I go in Israel, I'm going to see that that's not the time. It doesn't start up. Well, because of the Seleucids, specifically this time, we're going to see that in a future book, with Antiochus Epiphanes and his predecessors. What they did is they forced Israel to change their calendar. So the Pharisees changed the calendar, and that's the problems the Essenes had. So the Essene state, they kept the same calendar. And I tend to believe the Essenes. And the reason I tend to believe the Essenes, because the Essenes, using what they state as the original calendar, it's all found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Right? So you could go and do some reading about some of the stuff found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had their own prophecies, and one of the prophecies was that the Messiah will come and be killed for the people before what works out to be about 32, 33 AD. And that is exactly what happened. That's why I tend to believe in the Essene calendar. So this vision is for the time of the end. Which end? Our end, which is the time we're currently in. All right? That's why I'm doing the book of Daniel. 70% of the Bible, in one way or the other, is prophecy. And if we're a Christian and we're following God, God gave us a prophecy for one reason, or for a number of reasons. And one of them is for our benefit. All right? A couple times in the Bible, Jesus said, when you see XYZ, run. All right? So there was one time he stated that when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, which means when you see Jerusalem under siege, run. Don't go and grab stuff. Just get out and run for your lives. Now, logically, that makes no sense, because if you're under siege, that means that you're completely surrounded and you have nowhere to escape. However, in 68 AD, that happened. Vespasian, we're going to touch on this in a future video concerning the book of Daniel, but Vespasian and his son Titus came and they erected a siege wall around Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was there under siege. And then Vespasian was called to Rome, so the siege was broken. All right? The siege was broken. And the armies pulled back. And at that point, the Christians remember Jesus says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, run. So the Christians left. But those who did not believe in Jesus stated, Yahweh is going to take care of us and he's going to deliver us, he's going to save us. So we are staying and we're fighting to the end. A couple of years later, 2 years later, the Romans came back, this time under Vespasian's son Titus. Previously, Titus was, an assistant to his father. To his father. He was an under officer to his father. He was under his father, Vespasian. Now Titus was the ruling general. And they killed, sources like Josephus and others stated that they killed 1 million Jews. No Christians, because the Christians remember Jesus say, when you see Jerusalem surrounded, run. Now, if we have a bunch of prophecies, I stated that 70% of the prophecies of the Bible are 70% of the Bible is prophecy. Well, 70% of those prophecies have been fulfilled. 25% haven't. And 75%, have been fulfilled, and 25% haven't. And those 25% are for the time of the end. Some of it is to help us live, to save our lives, whatever the case. But if we don't know what they are, and we don't study them, right? We don't study them, then we put ourselves in problems. Okay? We put ourselves in problems. Someone give us something to help us, and we just don't use it. So, and unfortunately, a lot of churches don't even try to teach this, probably because a lot of people aren't interested. We just want to hear something nice and motivational to take us through the week. Hey, the Holy Spirit was within you. Lean on the Holy Spirit to take you through the week if life is hard. But you got to spend some time studying prophecy so you know what's coming. So when you see X, or when you see Y, or when you see the massive lies, you won't get fooled, because we live in a post-truth world. Everyone lies. Everyone lies. Governments lie. Everyone lies. You don't know what's the truth. But the truth's in the Bible. So if you use your Bible as your source of grounding, you'll be able to defend against the lies. So that's why I'm trying to do Daniel and others, to help myself and others, right, for what's coming in the future. Because we live in a very, very different world to the world of 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it's going to keep changing. All right, let's continue. And from verse 18, and when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and made me stand up. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end, or the set time of the end. Right? As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, those are the kings of Media and Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king, Alexander. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. All right, or not from his progeny. All right, those 4 kingdoms are the kingdoms of Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Moving on. And at the latter end of their kingdom, which kingdom? The kingdom of those 4 nations. When the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. He shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. This speaks of Antiochus, but this speaks beyond Antiochus. And by the way, Antiochus wasn't the rightful ruler of the Seleucid Empire. He kind of stole it. His brother was the ruler, and he, through various schemes and machinations, became the ruler. All right? So he became the great leader of the Seleucid Empire, not through his own power or through his own progeny. He kind of stole it. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. By his cunning, his skill, he shall make lies prosper under his hand. And in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. When you think peace and safety, sudden destruction. And he shall even rise up against the prince of princes. Now Antiochus rose up against the leader right, against the leader of Israel. He rose up against the head of the temple. And this person who is coming in the future shall rise up against Christ and shall be known as the Antichrist. But what will happen to him? And he shall be broken, but by no human hand. Many people tried to kill Antiochus. No one succeeded. Antiochus developed what they call a wasting disease. I have no idea what it is. And he died in horrible pain, in horrible agony. And in Revelation, we see that the future person is going to die, but not by human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. But seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but was appalled at by the vision and did not understand it. Yeah, some of the prophets prophesied stuff. They didn't understand the stuff at the time of the end. It's meant to be vague. But this is for the time of 2,300 years ago, and it's for now. It speaks of Antiochus, and it speaks of someone who is to come. And that someone who is to come is going to be cunning. He's going to be a great orator, and he's going to be fully human and fully something else. All right? So this is Daniel chapter 8. I'm currently working on Daniel chapter 9. So watch out for it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. God bless.